Welcome, everybody. This is Steve Sheahan from IBM. At IBM, my career has been spent as a human resources practitioner and a leader of sales teams providing HR outsourced service solutions. I'm proud to be a co-chair of the Atlanta Chapter of IAOP. Our chapter serves a large, diverse, and growing population, and I'm delighted that so many of our members have been able to join us for today's program. We also have people dialed in from as far away as India and the United Kingdom. We're very pleased to welcome participants from other chapters today. Today's program continues our discussion of outsourcing, not as it's portrayed in the public media, but as it is practiced by our members. This is a follow-up to a webinar discussion that we conducted on October 27th, which is available to members on the IAOP website. That discussion featured Ron Babin of Ryerson University and Bill Heffley at the University of Texas, who discussed their research on corporate social responsibility and outsourcing. The discussion was framed as a fact-based counterpoint to misconceptions about outsourcing that have emerged from public discourse in the United States and the UK. We discussed what their research reveals about sustainability as it applies not only to environmental responsibility, but also to talent management and the conservation of human resources. We also discussed the increasing prominence of corporate social responsibility as a client expectation, as an imperative for providers, and as a selection criterion applied by analysts. Today, we will continue this discussion by moving from the academic research to a focus on the experiences of the industry practitioners who make up today's panel. I'm joined today by Tim Brown from Equifax, Patrice Poulin from IBM, and Randy Wheely from KPMG. Tim Brown is Senior Vice President and leader of the Global Sourcing Office at Equifax, so Tim is a buyer of outsourced solutions. Patrice Poulin is Director of Global Human Resources Outsourcing Solutions for IBM. So Patrice is a provider of outsourced solutions. And Randy Wheely leads the sourcing service offering for KPMG's shared service and sourcing practice. So Randy is an advisor. We have all three IAOP constituencies represented on our panel today. Gentlemen, welcome. Our discussion last month acknowledged the prevalence of negative opinions in the public media that depict outsourcing as harmful to people and economies. But we also explored the research that reveals a wide variety of best practices being adopted with increasing frequency that give special attention to the impact of outsourcing. Practices that benefit clients, support affected people, and propel sustainable economic growth for everyone. Tim, I'm going to start with you today, if I may. Could you describe for us how, at Equifax, you evaluate providers and to what extent their corporate social responsibility posture or other best practices matter in your selection process?
Yep, absolutely, Steve. And first, let me say thank you to IAOP for giving me the opportunity to join the discussion today. I really appreciate it. Equifax, probably like many of the callers that are participating today, is a regulated company. So there are certain things just in that regulated environment that, especially for our U.S.-based outsourced partners, that we've got to go through a process, a very careful and selective process during due diligence to ensure that from a compliance standpoint, that they bring certain things to the table in terms of how they treat their own employees. For example, in our supplier diversity program, which is an area we continue to invest in, we've got to make sure that there's a fair opportunity given to minority-owned and women-owned businesses to be able to compete for the procurement of certain goods and services within Equifax. So we track that, certainly try to continue to raise the bar in terms of where those opportunities are being provided. So that's just kind of from a selection process. It's a little different, and I know everybody understands the difference between just outsourced versus offshoring. So it's a little different when we're talking about our partners offshore in terms of what some of our expectations are. But I'll go through some of that with you here just in a moment. One thing that I would say is that when you talk about corporate social responsibility, I mean, you can try to contract and require certain things of your vendors, but you're far better off, at least in my opinion, to ensure that you've got a relationship with those vendors and that you encourage them through your governance processes and through your communications with them to participate either directly with the kinds of things that your company is doing or for them to highlight what they're doing within their own companies when provided that opportunity. An example I'll give you within Equifax is, as a company, we focus on an annual basis in our United Way campaign, and we open that up to our vendors to participate in and give them the accolades and spotlight when they provide, whether it's time in some of the volunteer opportunities, whether it's financial contribution or some type of item that they might provide for a silent auction kind of thing. So another example would be in Habitat for Humanity or other types of corporate social affairs that the company does. We open that up and encourage our vendors to participate and give them accolades when they do so. Again, for our offshore partners, it's a little bit different. What we absolutely encourage that they are actively social in their communities, and we provide an opportunity, especially when we go and do site visits with them in their sites, whether that's in India, the Philippines, or whatever location it is, for them to go through and provide us an opportunity of understanding, what they're doing in their local communities, where they've invested their time, their effort, their dollars, so that we can understand that and support that as well.
Okay, so there's a lot of real work that goes into this in all of the communities in which you do business, whether they're here or abroad. That's good to hear. Patrice, let me pivot to you and ask you, because you're on this side, you're an outsourcing services provider. Give us your perspective on how your firm, which is also my firm, IBM, manages its social responsibilities with respect to outsourcing businesses.
Well, thank you, Steve. What I would like to say first is that IBM, has a very long reputation around social responsibility, and the way it is applied here to our outsourcing business is not any different to the way IBM does business with its other units. So the social responsibility program, if you will, is defined at the very top and trickles down through every location, every country, every business unit under IBM. So it's not unique to outsourcing. And the way IBM handles its social responsibility, first of all, is by defining a series of initiatives around 5 themes. The first one being communities, the second one being our employees, the supply chain is the third, the environment, the fourth, and the governance being the fifth. So every initiative, at least handle or identifies with one of those 5 initiatives, sometimes multiple, and it affects the way we do business everywhere at IBM. So to bring it back to, for example, the outsourcing business, when we decide to open a new operations center, whether it be in India or the Philippines, we take that choice of social responsibility very seriously in things as simple as the selection of the site itself. For example, we want to make sure that the location of that site is going to provide, is going to be a safe location for our employees, that it's going to have public transportation options for them, as well as a building that is friendly with the environment, whether it be LEED certified or have option for using renewable electricity and energy. So those are some examples, as well as back on the home ground, if you will, the United States. IBM has been partnering with different states to create some vocational programs, which are 6-year high school programs, where at the end, some of the graduates get hired by IBM to do different type of work that is needed here in the U.S. So, we are actually hiring our first graduates this year in the state of New York. We started out with one school about 6 years ago, and now this program has been rolled out to over 100 schools. So this is something that IBM takes very seriously. We produce an annual report, which is available on our website. And this past year, our report is about 100 pages long of very detailed initiatives centered around those 5 themes. And every initiative, for every initiative, IBM measures the impact that it has for the community. So we take this very seriously. And like I said, it's not any different for outsourcing than it is for the rest of our business.
Let me ask you with specific respect to the outsourcing transactions themselves, because I know we have a long history. We operate in 178 countries. I think at this point we're over 100 years old. So the impact within the communities in which we operate has always been important, and that's been evolving over the decades. In the transactions themselves, for affected employees, for example, are there practices that we engage in that help monitor the impact of the outsourcing transaction itself on affected employees?
Yes, definitely. So when we do transaction with clients, the impact of affected employees is one that we look at very, very closely with our clients. We tend to go with the rebadge route or the employee transfer route as much as possible, not only because it reduces the risk for us and for the client, but also because it's the right responsible thing to do to help with the transition from being in-house to an outsourced model. And what we're seeing here, the impact of that kind of practice, if you will, has been broader and even bigger and better than we expected. So we take, for example, in my area, which is HR, we've rebadged people that were payroll expert for a particular client. And as they've been transferred to IBM, over time, they've grown from being a payroll expert to just one client to being a payroll expert for a whole industry or a whole geography. And it has given them career development options that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And this is true not just here in the U.S., but also as we acquire captive shared service centers from clients abroad. We start by serving one client, and over time we grow that center to serve multiple clients. And again, the first employees who were rebadged by IBM from the first client find themselves growing into more management position and leadership positions over time. And those are opportunities and career paths that they would not have had otherwise.
So it can create opportunities as well. Do we see this? I think we do. In the RFPs that we respond to as providers, do prospective clients expect us to have a position on this? As Tim indicated, he expects this as his providers.
Absolutely, and we see it more and more. On a recent RFP this past week for a European insurance company, they were asking us specifically in the RFP if we were listed on the Dow Jones Sustainable Index, for example, whether or not we were being assessed by an external company such as EcoVadis, and to provide the detail of that assessment and to attach a copy of our corporate responsibility report. So these are the kind of questions we're seeing now that just a few years ago we didn't really see. So definitely a trend around companies who are becoming more and more conscious about who they do business with, just the same way as IBM does business with its own suppliers and providers or business partners. We vet them very seriously on their social responsibility. So the same thing is happening to us as we provide services to our clients.
Yeah, it was interesting last time when we were talking with our friends from the Academy, and they said there was a point at which their survey results, which go on every 3 years or so, showed a decrease in questions about about corporate social responsibility of vendors. And when they got down and dug underneath that, they found that people stopped asking about it because it was a given. It was so expected as table stakes that it was already in everybody's write-up. So the only reason it went down is that now everybody had to do it. So I think for companies of a certain size, at least, it's been the norm for a while. But let me ask Randy, do you advise clients to include this when they're selecting a provider for an outsourced transaction?
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Thanks also for inviting us to participate. We do include that as part of our criteria. Our clients, consider sourcing for typical reasons: additional capacity, improved capability, and reduced cost. But they do that being concerned about three things: their people, their reputation in their location, and their ability to sustain their business. And, as part of our advisement, it's important to be sensitive to evaluate the provider's effect on their social responsibility, kind of a shared responsibility, really. And our primary approach to that and our objective that we advise them to look at is, find a provider that aligns with your culture. Not everybody has the exact same view of how to go about that, so it's important that there's alignment in the culture. And that's proven to be a pretty key indicator of success in the relationship. And, these types of transactions are all about the people. Our clients are always considering this. The providers are very adept at discussing their approach to it. In the end, the responsibility does remain with the client. They own what happens to the people involved. But the providers have a great deal of expertise and insight into this because it is their business model, and they have a deep level of expertise on it.
It's interesting that it's become complex for players in this whole industry because you have to monitor your own stance and posture towards these things, grow it and evolve it over time, but you also have to be concerned about the entire value chain, the network in which you're operating, because we all depend on lots of other entities to put our solutions together, and so it becomes more complex. You really have to look across the ecosystem you're participating in to see where is there value, do I have consistency here, and it's really interesting to see how the uptake is across those kinds of systems. I want to ask a different kind of question if I can pivot to another topic, and this one, Randy, I'm going to direct to you again if we could. When we met last time at the webinar on October 27th, we stated clearly at the beginning that we wanted to have a professional and not a political discussion, and that is certainly still the case today. But with the United States election now passed, let me ask a question that I avoided last time. Practical policy specifics are yet to emerge in both the post-Brexit vote UK and in the United States, where specific legislative initiatives just are not yet articulated, where we are on the timeline. But the public discussion in both geographies suggests that some new limitations on transactions that cross national boundaries may be part of our new reality. And as we stated earlier, not all outsourcing involves offshoring, but some of it does. Do you, in your practice, Randy, do you anticipate that we will need to accommodate new limitations in our solution development? And how would you see our industry responding to this?
Yeah, that does seem likely. Obviously, we don't know the extent at this time. It's really not new. I mean, there's current restrictions in place, and they could be expanded. Right. Don't want to debate the pros and cons of such a position. I think, ultimately new ideas and innovations arise, and that replaces existing jobs. And so we've got to deal with that. Relative directly to the question of offshoring and outsourcing, I think the industry and our clients are going to respond to that with, nearshoring, moving to lower cost areas within domestic boundaries. And very importantly, with automation, which is already a key component of sourcing.
I think that's true. I think it's both kinds of things: is the flexibility we have in locations, and then what the technology enables as well. I think that's absolutely true. I know in earlier responses when we were just talking about this before, we mentioned twice both India and the Philippines, which of course are sources for a lot of the services that we advise. But I know in our case, at least, we have more than 65 different locations around the world from which we deliver services. And clients do have preferences for hemisphere and preferences for particular types of service being offered from particular types of geographies. So it's much more complex than what usually surfaces when you hear sound bites about it. But I think you're right. It's interesting that we have a lot more geographic flexibility than we used to, and the more and more the technology enables a good bit of flexibility in how we construct solutions. Interesting. I did want to take advantage because I was very, very pleased. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Steve, this is Tim. If I could, I was just going to add one more observation. This is just
Sure.
my opinion, but believing and understanding that everything that as a result of the election that the Trump administration is suggesting that they're focused on around U.S. jobs. If I look at the landscape, at least across Equifax, of a number of the IT kinds of jobs that we have offshored, if tomorrow somebody were to say you've got to bring all of those jobs back to the U.S. Because for creating U.S. jobs, which all of us as U.S. citizens, that's a great thing. But the reality is the talent and the skills and the capabilities within the U.S. Employee base doesn't exist. And I'm talking primarily in the STEM kinds of technologies, and a lot of what we have outsourced are our legacy kinds of things in COBOL and assembler and so forth. So the talent is not there coming out of our colleges that could support that kind of technology, and the folks that used to do it have since retired. So I think my point is there's just some certain realities there that it's not as simple as saying, hey, we've got X number of people unemployed in the U.S., let's bring all of those jobs back and give the unemployed those jobs, because it's the skill sets and talents aren't a one-for-one match. And I know that's stating the obvious, but I think sometimes it gets lost in the discussion.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a fair point that one of the consequences of a globalized economy is skills imbalances and the availability of skills from different political economies. Someone has pointed out that India now graduates more engineers than the United States does, which was far from the case for many, many years. And so work, because the technology allows it, can be done from nearly anywhere. And how we support the development of different skills and investments in our workforce will matter across the whole globalized economy ecosystem. So it is. You're absolutely right. I think it's a complex issue that needs to be addressed in a number of different ways, but certainly investment in the people, which was one of the tenets that we spoke about last time that showed up in the research. The conservation of human resources is really a key pillar of doing this in an excellent way, because that speaks to sustainability, which is important for all of us. We all want a stable platform from which we can support our clients and develop innovative solutions. And the availability of skills where we need them rapidly now and in the future is something that we have to care for as practitioners. Let me move to something else. I wanted to ask, because I was very lucky to get this panel, and I want to thank some of my panelists for joining us on fairly short notice, but I wanted to take advantage of the collective experience that we've got here to ask a bit of a broader question. We've been focusing on socially responsible outsourcing because that topic speaks directly to some of the pointed political criticisms of our industry and some of the things that people are legitimately concerned about. But there are also many other best practices out there that are advancing the art of what we do, ways in which we bring greater value to the whole outsourcing process. And so I want to do a quick poll of my panel here and ask you to describe briefly for us a best practice you use or have seen that you think supports excellence in outsourcing. Let me see now. Where can I start? Patrice, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. And this is something I think that was mentioned briefly earlier, but I think the whole aspect around automation and robotics, right, is going to define the next round or the next generation of outsourcing solutions. If you go back 10, 20 years ago, labor arbitrage is what was writing the business cases for outsourcing solutions, and clients could save a lot of money by offshoring the work. Now that a lot of the work has already been offshored, and in light of some of the more protectionism kind of policies that potentially are in store for us tomorrow, the next round, I think, is going to focus more on the technology that can actually emulate human thinking with artificial intelligence. The whole cognitive era has already started, and I think those kind of solutions will revolutionize the outsourcing world again. And the next round of business cases is not going to be based on labor arbitrage, but it's going to be based on productivity gains from further automation and robotics. And we're already seeing that. The wheel's already in motions, and we already have a lot of investment that's being made in that space. A lot of clients are already signing up for it. We're doing a lot of proof of concepts and pilots and deployment to our base accounts with Watson supercomputer, for example, that is helping us make a giant step in that direction already.
I think that's really a key point that lay people may not appreciate who don't do this particular kind of work. But you're right. It's one thing that jobs migrate to different locations, but some jobs change in character. The nature of work is dynamic. And as we learn different ways of doing things, there are certain positions that, as they were used to be configured, just no longer exist. We don't make cars today the way we made cars even 15 years ago, just in terms of what technology has enabled in the entire manufacture process. So that, too, is a moving target, and it complicates the work we do to try to care for some of these issues. Tim, let me ask you the same question. Best practice, besides corporate social responsibility, something that you are alert to that you think advances the art?
Yeah, absolutely, and something I'm actually very proud of within the organization that I lead here. What we've got currently is a very talented, very experienced team that has done transaction after transaction and worked in the outsourcing environment as a discipline for their careers for many, many years. And what we discovered and really thought about just a few years back is how could we take that organization and have a broader impact across the Equifax enterprise. And what that led us to is some discussions with our sales teams who more and more were finding professional sourcing organizations sitting across the table on our client sides when we entered into our revenue-generating contracts. And the salespeople began just asking if they could bounce some ideas off of our existing sourcing organization with regards to, hey, what might our clients, negotiators, be looking for when they ask this question or when they take this path down the discussions. So we started out providing just some consulting types of advice and direction. But over the last few years, we've actually expanded and dedicated a team to our sales organization. It's still part of sourcing, still very much involved and aware of what's going on in the sourcing industry, but they are dedicated to our salespeople to work across the table from the procurement sourcing organizations that our clients have in closing out and taking our contracts to an end state that best suit Equifax. So it's something I've actually talked about on many panels. It's something others on my team have written white papers and blogs about. But it's really taking the sourcing organization beyond just sourcing and taking our capabilities, our experiences, and best practices, and leveraging them in other areas across the enterprise. So just something I thought I'd share with you.
No, I think that's really good. One of my former positions was focused on contracts and negotiation, and it's not an area where a lot of people expect to see innovation, and yet it certainly is ripe for innovation. There are better ways to get to agreements, and sharing that expertise more broadly outside of one's legal team so that everybody becomes alert to those kinds of issues, I think that's really a very exciting development. Randy, you work with multiple clients. What kinds of things do you see? What do you think of when we ask this question and say, what are best practices these days that impress you with what people are doing?
Sure. It always goes back to the people involved. If it's labor arbitrage or the automation, it's always going to impact people. And our best practice there is transparency and communication. When we advise clients to spend significant time building a communication plan and a change management plan for the event. And people are aware that change is inevitable, and they want to be respected and have time to prepare. And our clients, which do take the time to prepare their people, they do that at some risk. They may leave on their own prior to, when they might, the outsourced transactions. But it generally results in a much smoother transition and resources which are prepared, to face their new situation. And so, it's not always possible, but we certainly encourage, open communication to the resources involved, so that they do have that time to prepare and are respected in the process.
I think that's really helpful. There are people who are paying attention to this to get better at it. I wanted to just remind our participants who are on the website, just looking at that static chart that shows the whole panel, you do have an opportunity to share with us your best practices as well. And I've been monitoring some of the comments that are coming in. Let me call out a few of them while you're typing, if you guys want to input and share the kinds of things that can make us all proud about the industry we're in, because we're getting better about it all the time. In terms of the earlier discussion a few minutes ago, where we were talking about the globalized economy, we had a comment that said it seems counterproductive, the whole concept of pulling jobs back from Asia. It seems to be in conflict with the global mindset and global access to talent that most large companies are aiming for. And I agree with that. The sort of inevitability of the globalized economy that we're all working with now, which seems pretty well irreversible, gives us greater opportunities to find skills in different localities and to grow ones that we need, across the world, not just in our own countries. So keeping the balance so that we can support our clients where they need to be supported is something that's important to us, and to do it in a way that minimizes the adverse impacts of all of these kinds of transactions. I also wanted to mention, that there is an article in the current issue of Pulse that talks about the best practice at Equifax in the current issue of Pulse magazine. So I invite you to check that out as well. I wanted to, because we're moving into the second half, I did want to open this conversation to something else, which really speaks to the overall theme we've had. These two discussions that we've had, and I hope it's something that can continue across multiple programs, had to do with defending outsourcing, being proud of what we do, focusing on what's beneficial and innovative in these transactions, and in how we ply our trade, if you will. Because, we're celebrating Thanksgiving in this country next week, and I wanted to ask my panel to imagine that one of your most challenging relatives leans across the turkey and dressing and says, how can you work in that industry? For the benefit of everybody who's participating, how would you tell them that you're proud to be in outsourcing? Randy, I'm going to start with you this time.
Okay. Well, I would probably say something a lot shorter than what I'm about to say, but for purposes of the discussion, I think change is inevitable. You can slow the progression, but you can't stop it. And it's never easy for the people involved. But as we discussed today, there are ways to achieve the goals in a socially responsible manner. We need to care about and for the people impacted, but also keep in mind that companies outsource and find other ways to lower their cost structure in order to sustain their business. And sustaining that business provides jobs and opportunities to many other people, in their company and throughout the supply chain. And I could also relate to what Patrice mentioned earlier. I was one who was outsourced at one point in my career, and it afforded me great opportunity.
Excellent. I've had that same experience, and it helped me very much as an outsourcing practitioner, particularly when I was operating in human resources and migrating people who were affected by this in a client company, to be able to say that I had been sitting once on the side of the desk that they were on, had that experience and could, provide some personal testimony as to what new opportunities became available with the change in the flag under which I was operating, and some of the responsibilities I was then able to discharge. So it really can represent, if it's managed properly and navigated with care, with the right human resources sensibilities, become something that really advantages a lot of people as well as the organizations for which they work. Patrice.
Yeah, so I can definitely picture that relative, right? What I would do probably is pull that tag off that person's collar on his shirt and read to him where that was manufactured and make him realize that the global economy is not something new. Offshoring is not something new. I mean, if you think about, when North America was discovered by the Europeans, they were on the trade for spices. So when you look at it, all we're doing that may be new here is that we're offshoring for the services industry, but the manufacturing industry has been doing this for years. And the reason I'm proud to be in that industry is because, unlike the manufacturing industry, we provide much better quality jobs in terms of working conditions, compensation, safety, et cetera. And we're creating wealth opportunities for people outside of the United States to help them elevate them out of poverty, help their families out. So we're in essence sharing the wealth, all the while back home creating opportunities for higher skilled type jobs. So all in all, I think it's really a win-win for everybody. And of course, there's some people who are going to be impacted in the short term with a negative impact, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's definitely a step forward and improvement for everybody involved.
Okay. Randy. I'm sorry, Randy, I asked already. Tim, I wanted to give you a chance to, so you were at Thanksgiving dinner, Tim.
All right. Well, I mean, your scenario is actually not too far from what's happened, at least in my household. It may not have been around Thanksgiving, but I can remember a time when my kids were younger, when they couldn't understand what I did for a living, and I actually had to go through the idea and understanding of what outsourcing is. And let me say, for the purpose of this discussion, it's important to delineate outsourcing from offshoring, right? So, the example I can recall using with my kids is that, when I have to call and have somebody come in and fix the furnace, air conditioner at home, that's a form of outsourcing. I mean, it's bringing in talent from somewhere else to come in and do something that if I had the skills myself, I would do it, or if I had the time to do it, I would. But neither of those exist. So therefore, I've got to outsource that task to somebody. On a broader scale, that's what I do, and that's what my team does for Equifax on an ongoing basis, is we outsource needs in places that we either don't have the talent, the skills, or the time to do ourselves. So, I mean, that's a pretty simple concept, and I don't think there should be anything that's too controversial about that. And to earlier points, I mean, that's been done for centuries, right? I mean, there's nothing unusual about that. Where I do think people then sometimes, have the conflict and don't quite understand, how could you offshore a job that somebody in the U.S. could have, that becomes a little bit more of a challenging discussion. But I do take pride in knowing that, at least in my world, that the companies that I've worked for where we have offshored, they would not have been as successful and would not have been able to continue to employ the number of U.S.-based employees that they have if they had not taken advantage of the skills and talent in offshore locations. So, if you want to talk about protecting jobs, which certainly all of us, again, from a patriotic standpoint, are concerned about making sure that jobs are as protected as possible, the reality is that you cannot remain competitive in the global environment that we're in if you don't leverage the talent in places that they exist at the cost point that they exist. If you choose not to do that, then not only are you actually losing, jobs, you're probably not going to survive as a company. And that's, if I didn't truly believe that, then I would have a difficult time coming in to work every day and doing what I do. But I believe that what we're doing is actually helping the company and helping the employees that we have for a better future for themselves.
I think that's very, very fair points, all of you. I think about reflecting on this, myself, and I've been 35 years with IBM, and when I began with the company, the people who worked in our cafeteria were IBMers. The people who cut the grass were IBMers. That used to be the norm of the way these things were organized, and it no longer is anywhere. Most companies and skills have been regrouped into specialty families, and then we call on other organizations to supply different pieces of what we need to sustain ourselves, our infrastructure, and our enterprises. But if I look across in the aggregate, and Patrice, I think you made this point, that in the large picture, we can see it creating value and opportunity. And I can look across what I've done, and I've worked on projects in Mexico and in Canada and in the UK and Japan, where value is created and positive benefit is delivered. And you can also see that the clients whose operations and infrastructure are improved by these solutions are enabled to grow and to create more opportunities for their workforces and for others in their community. So in a very large scale, we can see that there's value. It's an irreversible process, and it's something that we can certainly be proud to contribute to in terms of excellence. But at the same time, Patrice, you mentioned, in the near term, there's breakage. It doesn't affect everyone equally. It's not immediately beneficial to all of the affected people. And if that's our challenge in this industry, our challenge to how do we go as quickly with innovation in human resources, in skills development, in the investment of and conservation of the human resources under our care, how do we do that as quickly as we grow technology solutions? How can the technology solutions that we are growing be applied to those problems so that we can identify skills more rapidly and do training that's real time to conserve the resources that we have? These are some of the challenges that are legitimately laid at our door, as people in our industry. But when you listen to all of the best practices that this panel's been sharing, and we see the benefits and the value, we see from the research we discussed last month how rapidly these things are growing, it really is an impressive body of work that we're engaged in. And I think we can all proceed to the Thanksgiving dinner table with pride. I did want to make time to review some of the comments that have come in. People have been giving me some best practices of their own, thank you, in the chat. One was to provide cross-cultural education to both sides of an offshore team. Cultural differences still play a large role in communication challenges in offshore teams, but some teams feel that because they've created a global work culture, they don't need to pay attention to national, regional, or operational cultures, that the impact is still there. I think that's a absolutely very good point. Thank you, Vicki, from Atlanta, for providing that. I know that we have invested in some of that for our workforces in non-U.S. centers that provide support for other countries. It was very important for us to be able to train people in Hungary, for example, who were supporting clients in Ireland, what some of those cultural norms were. And so there was a real cross-cultural component that helped bind people much more closely to the clients that they supported, but also just expanded everybody's universe on both sides so that people really understood that this language center of learning that is supporting you also has, human beings that appreciate and understand how you are looking at a problem and what you might be asking for, the question behind your question when you're seeking support from them. So I agree with that. I think it's a good practice to do that. There's a lot of innovation that could be done in that to make the world smaller for everyone. Another comment, outsourcing provides an opportunity to get the best talent to provide excellent services to the customers at an optimal cost, which is true. And figuring out how to do that rapidly and keeping all of these moving pieces in play in a socially responsible way that minimizes adverse impact and grows the art of what we do is that's our body of work. That's our challenge. But when I look at what I'm hearing, I see that I could testify that I think we're doing it quite well with a lot of energy and intelligence. We're coming close to the top of the hour. I wanted to take the time to thank our panelists for a really engaging conversation. This has been a terrific topic for us, and I've really enjoyed hearing from you all about it. I also want to invite all of today's participants to stay tuned in to the work of the Atlanta chapter. We are planning a full program for 2017 of meetings and webinars to keep us all learning from one another throughout the new year. I want to wish happy holidays to all of you. We look forward to talking with you again early in the first quarter. Thank you very much for your participation today, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.